5 people were executed in Maryland. John Frederick Thanos, May 17, 1994. In 1992, American serial killer John Frederick Thanos was found guilty of the killings of Gregory Taylor, Billy Weinbrenner, and Melody Pistorio, 3 teenagers. He became the first person to be executed in Maryland since 1961, when he was put to death for the murders in 1994. Born in Dundalk, Maryland, Thanos was the son of John Stephen and Patty Thanos. Stephen was seen as a psychologically ill World War II veteran who drugged his wife and mistreated John Thanos harshly. Due to a number of misdeeds, Thanos was expelled from school and spent a long time in and out of jail. In Rosedale, Maryland, in October of 1969, Thanos essayed a woman. After being found guilty of the crime, he received a 21-year prison sentence. He made threats against the judge during his trial, and in 1971 he made an attempt to escape from prison. He managed to get away, but he was apprehended again not long after. April 1986 saw Thanos' release from prison. Nevertheless, he returned to prison just 1 month later, having carried out an armed robbery at a convenience shop. He received a second sentence of 8 years in prison. On April 15, 1990, a jail official who was subsequently fired made a mistake that resulted in Thanos' unintentional early release. After being freed, Thanos worked in Salisbury as a bricklayer and later as a poultry processor. He exposed himself to a woman who gave him a ride in the summer of 1990. Thanos was afraid he would be sent back to prison after the woman accused him of the crime. Later, in a confession captured on camera, Thanos would say that he went on a crime spree because he was afraid his parole would be taken away. Thanos resigned from his position on August 29, 1990, and bought a semi-automatic rifle. In order to fit the gun in the black doctor's bag he carried around, he sawed down the barrel. That same evening, he threatened to kill a taxi driver who disobeyed his demands after robbing him at gunpoint and forcing him into the car's trunk. While hitchhiking, Thanos came upon Greg Taylor, who was 18 years old. He ordered Taylor to drive to a rural spot along a remote road where he planned to tie him to a tree while holding him at gunpoint in his car. After Taylor failed to comply with his demands, Thanos shot him 3 times in the head. After that, he took Taylor's car and changed his looks to more closely resemble him. When Thanos got to the patrol station on September 1st, he gave 16-year-old Billy Weinbrenner his father's watch in exchange for $20 and some gas. They came to an agreement whereby Thanos would pay $60 to return to the gas station and retrieve the watch. The next day, Thanos shot the Salisbury convenience store clerk in the head during a robbery. After the gunshot, the cashier lived, and Thanos made off with $96. When he went back to the patrol station on September 3, he saw Weinbrenner and Melody Pistorio, his 14-year-old friend, who had gone to the station to keep him company. The watch was with Pistorio, who left it in her jewelry box at home, thus Weinbrenner did not have it with him. Taking out his rifle, a furious Thanos demanded that Weinbrenner fill his bag with cash while he robbed the gas station at gunpoint. All of the register's cash was turned over by the two. After giving them both deadly gunshot wounds to the head, Thanos left the shop. Salisbury police noticed him driving north on September 4. He fit the description of an individual wanted in connection with a recent armed robbery. After the police stopped him, Thanos brought his car to a halt. He opened fire on the cops as they drew near him, prompting them to retaliate. During the gunfight, nobody was wounded, and Thanos drove off. He left his car outside of some trees and ran toward the highway on foot. He hailed down a passing driver and forced his way inside the vehicle. Following his instructions, the driver transported him out of the state. After traveling into Delaware, the two were seen by a Smyrna policeman. Police surrounded the car as the officer pursued it into a parking lot. The driver got out of the car and Thanos started running after the police with a gun. There was a gunfight in the parking area where 3 cops opened fire on Thanos. After emptying his gun, Thanos finally surrendered. A number of vehicles were struck during the gunfight, but no one was actually hurt. Delaware police turned over Thanos to the Maryland State Police on September 5. He made fun of his victims' families throughout his trial by joking that he wished he could unearth their remains and defile them. Thanos was found guilty and given the death penalty. He then waived all of his appeals and declined to challenge the ruling. During that period, Maryland's only available method of execution was by gas chamber. In an effort to present proof that a gas chamber execution is cruel and unusual as defined by the Eighth Amendment and therefore unconstitutional, Thanos granted the request of the attorney of another prisoner under a death sentence to have his execution videotaped and his EEG data recorded. In response, the Maryland legislature established lethal injection as method of execution in January 1994. On May 17, 1994, the state of Maryland carried out its first execution since 1961. Thanos was the first person to be killed by lethal injection in Maryland. Adios was the last statement spoken by 45-year-old Thanos. Flint Gregory Hunt, July 2, 1997. On November 18, 1985, Hunt fired twice at Baltimore police officer Vincent Adolfo in an East Baltimore alley, killing him. Out of 5 children, Hunt was the third. His sisters claimed that his mother beat him with extension wires and switches. When Hunt was 17, his father drank himself to death. Officer Vincent Adolfo, then 25 years old, saw a Cadillac with a plastic-covered missing window on November 18, 1985, while he was on patrol in Baltimore, Maryland. Seeing that there were 4 people inside the car, he made the decision to look into it. He discovered quickly that the car had been reported stolen. Adolfo trailed the vehicle and called for assistance. Ahead, a barrier was set up by 2 responding units. When he approached the roadblock, Hunt, the driver of the stolen car, leaped off the car. After continuing to drive, the car struck one of the patrol cars that was obstructing the route. The final 3 occupants were taken into custody by the officers. Adolfo chased after Hunt on foot as he ran into an alleyway. Hunt was apprehended by Adolfo, who positioned him against a wall and got ready to handcuff him. He was knocked over and thrown aside as he tried to apprehend Hunt. Hunt then produced a gun and fired a close-range shot that struck Adolfo once in the chest. Hunt then gave him another gunshot wound to the back before leaving the area. After being taken to a local hospital, Officer Adolfo was declared deceased. Hunt made his getaway and phoned his friend, telling him that he had just killed a police officer with a gun and asking if he could give it to him. After that, Hunt and his girlfriend went to his sister's house, but they left when a TV show declared that Hunt was wanted in connection with the crime. Hunt and his girlfriend drove to Camden, New Jersey the next day. He told his girlfriend that he had killed Adolfo during the drive. After that, the two split up, with Hunt traveling to Santa Monica, California via bus by himself. He was taken into custody on November 23 at a bus station in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when a passenger reported him to the police after observing him acting strangely. Before being sent back to Maryland to stand prosecution for murder, he was detained at a Tulsa jail. He was additionally accused of carrying a pistol illegally and of using it to commit a violent crime. A jury found Hunt guilty of first-degree murder in June 1986, and he was given the death penalty. While incarcerated, he converted to Islam. Hunt initially asked to be put to death in a gas chamber. In an interview with the Baltimore Sun, Hunt disclosed that he had selected this course of action to maximize the brutality of the state's execution of him and to make his death appear more like murder. Later, after learning that his mother and bride desired to watch the execution, he switched to a lethal injection one. Following his farewell statement and an Arabic prayer, Hunt was killed by lethal injection at the Maryland Penitentiary on July 2, 1997. At 12:25 a.m., he was pronounced deceased. He was the first prisoner to be killed by the state without consent and the second person to be put to death in Maryland since the Gregg v. Georgia ruling of 1976. In addition, he was the 400th person to be put to death in the U.S. since the death penalty was reinstated. Tyrone Jilliam Jr., November 16, 1998. In 1998, Maryland executed Tyrone Jilliam Jr., who had been found guilty of murder. On December 2, 1988, he was found guilty and given the death penalty for the abduction and killing of Christine Dorfler, a 21-year-old woman. Jilliam was drinking and doing drugs with Kelvin Drummond and his brother Tony the night of the murder. As Dorfler pulled out of her car in the parking lot, the three men carjacked her. When they discovered she had only $3 on her, they made her go to an ATM and take out cash. They decided against it on the way to the ATM, and Jilliam shot Dorfler in the head with a sawed-off shotgun after they pulled over in a remote spot. 3 days after they tried to rob a convenience shop, Jilliam and the two Drummond brothers were taken into custody. Following Kelvin Drummond's identification of Jilliam as the shooter, Jilliam confessed after police discovered the murder weapon in his vehicle. Rather than have a jury hear his case, Jilliam decided to have a judge do it. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, robbery with a dangerous weapon, using a pistol while committing a felony, and kidnapping by Circuit Court for Baltimore County Judge John Fader. Jilliam was given a death sentence on October 31, 1989, for the murder of Christine Dorfler. Kelvin Drummond consented to enter a guilty plea and provide evidence against Jilliam, but Tony Drummond was found guilty on his own and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kelvin was given a life sentence with the chance of release in exchange for his testimony and guilty plea. On November 16, 1998, 32-year-old Jilliam was put to death by lethal injection at the Maryland Penitentiary. At 10:27 p.m., he was pronounced deceased. His final hope had been a clemency appeal to Governor Paris Glendening, turned down the day before. Additionally, the U.S. Supreme Court denied 2 last-minute appeals. Jilliam's family was not allowed to attend the execution, and none of Dorfler's family members made the decision to do so. In the death chamber, Jilliam did not offer an apology or show regret. His final words were, "Allah, forgive them for what they do." Similar to every prisoner put to death in Maryland, Jilliam received no special final meal. Stephen Howard Oaken, June 17, 2004. In November 1987, 3 women in Maryland and Maine were essayed and killed by American spree killer Stephen Howard Oaken. In Maryland, he received a death sentence and was put to death by lethal injection in 2004. After being raised by a Jewish family, Oaken graduated in 1980 from Randallstown High School. He was a heavy drinker and had stolen medication from the pharmacy owned by his adoptive father. Dawn Marie Garvin, 20 years old, was killed on November 1, 1987, by 25-year-old Stephen Oaken. Her father discovered her naked on the bed in her White Marsh apartment, blood dripping from her forehead and a condiment bottle sticking out of her private area. She was dead despite her father and the paramedics' best attempts to do CPR. She suffered 2 contact gunshot wounds. One entered at her left eyebrow and the other at her right ear, according to an autopsy conducted after her death. At his townhouse, Oaken essayed and killed his sister-in-law, Patricia Antoinette Hurt, 43, less than 2 weeks after killing Dawn Garvin. He then dumped her body along White Marsh Boulevard. After that, he ran away and killed 25-year-old Lori Ward, the motel desk clerk where he was staying in Kittery, Maine. After being taken into custody in Maine on November 17, 1987, he was found guilty of Ward's murder and given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Following his return to Maryland, Oaken was charged with 2 different murders, each of which was the subject of a separate prosecution. After being found guilty, Oaken received a death sentence for the 1991 murder of Dawn Garvin. After hearing the ruling, Oaken admitted to also killing Patricia Hurt and was given another life sentence. At the Metropolitan Transition Center in Baltimore, Stephen Oaken, then 42, was executed by lethal injection on June 17, 2004 at 9:18 p.m. local time. The governor declined to grant mercy. That day, his last meal was the standard prison fare, which consisted of a chicken burger, potatoes and gravy, green beans, marble cake, milk, and fruit punch. Wesley Eugene Baker, December 5, 2005. Jane Frances Tyson was a mother and grandmother who was killed in Catonsville on June 6, 1991, in front of her two grandchildren. Wesley Eugene Baker was found guilty of the murder. He was the last man executed in Maryland. Baker was essayed as a youngster by his mother, stepfather, and two teenage girls. At the age of 15, he was addicted to alcohol and he had a child with a 28-year-old heroin user. At the age of 16, he was found guilty of his first criminal offense and sentenced to 3 years in prison for using a motor vehicle without authorization. He was found guilty of armed robbery in 1978 and sentenced to 15 years in prison. After serving 9 years in prison, he was only free for 2 years before being taken into custody once more for offenses involving drugs and firearms. On June 6, 1991, Wesley Baker approached Jane Tyson, 49, as she was getting into her car with her grandchildren, a 4-year-old girl and a 6-year-old boy, after she had gone shoe shopping in the Westview Mall parking lot in Catonsville. After putting a gun to her ear and demanding her handbag, he suddenly pulled the trigger, murdering her in the process. He made his escape in a Chevrolet Blazer to where his accomplice was waiting. A bystander noticed the two escaping in a vehicle. After taking note of the license plate, he called the police, who soon arrested Gregory Lawrence and Wesley Baker. On October 26, 1992, a jury found Baker guilty of first-degree murder, robbery with a deadly weapon, and using a pistol while committing a felony. 4 days later, the same jury sentenced him to death and an additional 40 years for the other 2 counts. The Maryland Court of Appeals maintained the conviction and sentence. Lawrence was given life in prison plus 33 years after being found guilty of the identical offenses a year prior. Baker was put to death by lethal injection on December 5, 2005, and was declared deceased at 9:18 p.m. Since the landmark 1976 ruling in Gregg v. Georgia, he was the 1,002nd execution to occur in the United States. Prison officials did not ask him whether he had any last words to say. According to his attorneys, he had made amends and shown regret for his actions. Baker had minimal response when the deadly chemical injections were administered. He did start to breathe more loudly, more quickly, and with a gasping, sucking sound. Baker's last meal consisted of breaded fish, pasta marinara, green beans, orange fruit punch, bread, and milk. The death penalty was banned in Maryland in 2013. Governor Martin O'Malley commuted the sentences of the last 4 sentenced prisoners to life in prison on December 31, 2014. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.